Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, all. I had a really scary dream last night. I dreamt I was in a surreal police state, and there were people in red shirts running everywhere. I'm not quite sure why I had that dream, but nonetheless, I'd like to acknowledge the organizing committee and thank them for accepting our paper. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this study, Mike Charlevoix and Hans Scatter from HAB-TECH, and Brady Balicki and Kent England from Chemical Corporation. Bit of background, as has been mentioned last couple of days, the proposed Environment Canada National Recovery Strategy looks at a total disturbance threshold of 35%, of which natural disturbances, mainly fire, and buffered human disturbances are of an equal weight in that threshold. The models assume that they accept fire polygons from provincial governments, overlay them on the land, and assume that all habitats within map fire polygons that are less than 40 years of age are disturbed habitat versus existing habitat for caribou. Now, in the Boreal Shield, where this study is taking place of northern Saskatchewan, there's a single dominant land use in that region, which is uranium mining. There's no logging, there's no oil and gas. So because of that, naturally the human footprint the buffered human footprint is low. It's only from 1 to 3% of the land. Yet fires are very common in that region, as they are in a lot of the shield, but especially for some reason in northern Saskatchewan. And that fires less than 40 years cover 35 to 50% of the landscape. So we're left with a situation where this area in the Northern Shield and the 4 or 5 local populations of caribou in the Northern Saskatchewan Shield are already over threshold just from fire. And they have this limited anthropogenic footprint. So my client, Chemical, was concerned about that, and they didn't understand it. They said, well, how can that be? And could you help us out? And that's what we've done here. So we used 3 approaches to get at this problem, I guess you could call it. We classified and mapped residual patches, upland and lowland and water, in selected young fires in the region. The second component was to look at the assumption that younger stands do not offer habitat for caribou, and we wanted to make sure of that. We wanted to understand that a little bit more, so we did that. And the third was to understand, in a preliminary sense, how caribou are using the landscape in a typical area with overlapping fires and a burned and unburned mosaic. So we chose the area around Key Lake because we knew there was a long-term population in the Key Lake area. The Key Lake mine has been around for about 40 years. It's the most built-out mine, uranium mine, in the region, in all of northern Saskatchewan. We looked at a 25-kilometer radius circle around the Key Lake mine, and we chose 6 fires in that circle to look at residual patches in them. And these same fires were the same ones used by the Environment Canada folks to run their natural disturbance model. So here's one of the fires. It's about 36 square kilometers. The area in brown is upland residual patches that are mature, that weren't burned. The green are upland lowland residual patches, fens, and to a lesser extent bogs. And the blue are water bodies. And the matrix in gray is actual burned. The points that you see there, for every one of the fires, we selected 40 random residual patches, and we flew over them with a helicopter and classified them, collected a bunch of data. And we selected 40 randomly located matrix patches in the burn to determine if we were seeing burn. And we were using Landsat TM imagery to do the classification. So what did we find? We found that averaged across all 6 fires that from 22 to 37% of the fire was actually not burned. It was residual. We found that water covered about 4 to 12%. So combined, in these averaged across the 6 fires, you got about 34% that is available to caribou and not burned. So that was interesting in itself, and then we moved on to the second component. Second component was looking at the suitability of young forests as caribou habitat. So we've been working in the region up in these areas doing baseline inventory for mines for about 10 years now. We've been collecting detailed field plots with vascular and non-vascular plants being sampled. So lichens were sampled to species. The Ministry of Environment, Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment, in building a field guide for the region, collected another 600 or so. They were kind enough to give us their data, and we pooled the data and looked at the relationship between certain variables such as lichen cover, ground lichen cover, hiding cover, preferred moose browse against 10-year age classes, as we found in the field. So you can see here, I'm just going to present upland pine. It's our best data, and the pine forest covers a great deal of the landscape up in the Key Lake area. It's probably over 80% of the forested area. So we're mainly interested in this break right here. Under 40, according to Environment Canada, not caribou habitat. Over 40, caribou habitat. We wanted to know what happened right here. So we took all of our upland plots and did a scatter diagram against stand age. We had this really interesting abrupt transition between very little lichen, ground lichen. This is all lichen cover now. I believe it is. Hans can tell different if I'm wrong, but I believe this is all lichen cover. And at around 25 years, we see it coming in. We kind of wondered about that, so we thought maybe there's some other studies that have been done that found similar or different things. And lo and behold, a recent Journal of Wildlife Management study by Collins et al. in the Alaska taiga, further north than where we're working, found a similar pattern of abrupt transition, but at about 50 years of age. So then we looked at, we looked at 10-year intervals, mean lichen cover, but I drilled down to preferred lichens for caribou, Cladina mitis, Cladina rangiferina, Cladina stellaris, and Cladonia uncialis that are eaten a little bit more by caribou to try to, take out the stereocolons and peltigerous that aren't used as much. And again, at 20 to 30 years, we had very high lichen cover, and 30 to 40 as well. I stopped here just because I want to keep the graph small, but if you extend it into the 120 to 180, it's up around here, about 40% for lichen, so it's best up here. But nonetheless, these areas below here, there is lichen there, and there is palatable lichen. We also looked at hiding cover because we all know caribou don't like to hide to get away from predators. They like to run and they like to see things. So you can see here we did the same thing with we used NUDS, 1977 NUDS. It's a 2.5 meter cover board, just HAB-TECH plots. And you can see here that hiding cover is much greater in the young stands than in the old stands, and that's not necessarily good for caribou. In fact, it isn't. So what did we find in general? Component 2, preferred lichen forage does occur in younger stands above 25 years of age, up to 25 to 40. Young pine forests have much greater density of hiding cover, and that's not necessarily good for caribou. So even though it appears that there is some value to these young stands for caribou, do they actually use the young stands? Now this is, of course, done better with other methods, but we had to answer this question fairly quickly for our client. So what we did is we flew 2 aerial surveys, one in December, one in March, in an area 40 kilometers by 40 kilometers, and centered on the Key Lake mine again, similar to where we did our residual study. And and just located with the GPS, from handheld GPS from the air, all locations of animals and all locations of feeding craters and trails. So this is the study area, 40 by 40. This is the Key Lake mine, and there's a road that goes up to the other mines up in this area here towards Wollaston Lake. And what you're seeing is the hot tones, the red tones are younger fires, all probably under about 6 years of age or 10 years of age. The darker greens in here, the olives, are black spruce. The lighter greens and the oranges are jack pine. The blue are clusters of caribou observations from the aerial surveys, and all these yellows are moose. We flew 1 kilometers. Every 1 kilometer, we flew back and forth this way with a 400-meter viewing window. So what did we find? We found that the densities of caribou in that region were 6 to 9 animals per 100, which is, for the boreal shield, is above average a little bit. It's usually around 0.05, according to Alan Arsenault and Tim Trottier and people like that work up there. We found moose densities of 0.03. So moose in that region are not dense. There isn't a lot of good forage for moose, and there's not very many wolves up in that region as well, because they might be under that threshold that Crete had of moose density for having a viable wolf population. There are wolves, but they're in small numbers. So feeding crater-wise, we found 226 locations. 24% of these observations were recorded and this is viewing from the helicopter now, in burns, even recent burns, or young forest regeneration, or mature forest as residual patches within burns, or along lake shores or on lakes. For trails, 31% were in regenerating forest, burns, residual patches within burns, and on lakes or lake shores. Another way to look at the issue that we have here, and I'm almost finished, is we looked at, for every plot we did in the field, we got an age of the forest through coring trees. And then, of course, we added this 7 years or 12 years, depending on the forest type, for growth to breast height. We subtracted that age, we subtracted from it the age when we overlaid the plot onto the forest cover polygon that predicted age based on burn. If they were the same, you should see a clustering around 0. But you can see here that the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment burn polygons significantly overestimate the amount of young forest on the land. So that's another thing that's complicating the issue. So, I'm not trying to, I know that the modeling that Environment Canada did was very important. It's vital as a national model. But clearly, when you run a national model, you run a super regional model of any kind, there's winners and losers, and there's issues around testing and assumptions. And that's all we did here. We're going to continue this work. We're in the pre-planning phase of a radio telemetry study that we're going to start up this winter. And we're going to take a much closer look at how caribou respond to total disturbance, to natural disturbance, and to human disturbance in the boreal shield of Saskatchewan. And we're really looking forward to that work. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.